Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Let's start with the story of how OP, a young system admin, found himself unexpectedly fired from a government contract job due to a project's failure. After a tense meeting with his manager, who insisted OP was ineligible for unemployment, things took an unexpected turn. But before we begin, best way to support our channel is to leave comments, like, and subscribe with the turned-on bell so you don't miss the new video every single day. Here we go. Sorry, no unemployment for you, but... Back in the early 90s, I was working for a company that provided staffing for U.S. government agencies. I was a system administrator at a large Department of Transportation facility. One day I walked in, was told to see my supervisor, who very apologetically told me that Uncle Sam no longer wanted me working there, and, well, I was fired. I was told to go to the contracting company's office on the other side of town, which I'd never been, to save the day I was hired. Shocked, I drove up there. I was like 24 and had never been fired before. In retrospect, I know what happened. The project I was working on was failing. Not because of anything I did or didn't do. The concept itself was flawed. There were 3 people who worked on the project. 2 were federal FTEs, plus me, the contractor. Anyone who has had experience with this knows the contractors are the first to go. So I'm sitting with the manager of the local branch, who has an email from the government employee in charge of the doomed project, listing a parade of horribles that I had done. Some of the minor ones were true. I had been late a few times, but the major ones were just fabrications. They claimed there was a problem with the networking and that a contractor had to be engaged to fix the problem. Is that true? Well, yes, I am that contractor. I diagnosed the problem and then I fixed the problem. That's my job, or at least it was until a couple of hours ago. The manager realizes pretty quickly what's going on. Not that it gets me my job back. As we go through these separation procedures, he tells me that per company policy, he's required to document that I am not eligible for unemployment compensation. I just nodded because I didn't know much about these things. He says I'm getting a 2-week notice and that for the next 2 weeks I'm to show up to his office. He offered the use of office equipment to print resumes, apply for other jobs, and the like. So after a couple of days, he says he set up an interview for me at another project at the same facility. Sure. I went down there, sat with the project manager. Interview lasted less than 5 minutes. So we're a COBOL shop here. What's your experience with COBOL? None whatsoever. So we both realized it was a bad fit. I went back to the office, confused as hell. The site manager knew I didn't have COBOL experience. Why did he send me there? I found out a few weeks later I had applied for unemployment compensation anyway upon the urging of friends who said that policy sounded really sketchy. I had an interview at the unemployment office and they looked over the paperwork, noticed the form said ineligible, and the lady explained that I could contest that. I said, sure. She asked me if I'd been applying for work. I said, yes. She asked if I'd had any interviews. I told her about the one I'd had. Her eyes widened. She smiled. If they interviewed you for another position, that means you were not terminated for cause. You were let go because of lack of work. That's a layoff. She then marks on the paper that I am eligible for unemployment compensation. I ask if I still need to contest their finding. No, they can contest my determination, but given that they've actively tried to keep you employed after these events, it's not gonna fly. He did you a big favor by sending you on that interview. It's wild how that one seemingly pointless interview turned out to be the key to proving it wasn't termination for cause, but actually a layoff. He made everything by the book, even not telling you that you should get unemployment, but made sure that if you're wise or have wise friends, you're guaranteed unemployment compensation. And our second story. Not putting in enough hours, you say? A few years ago, I worked as a field engineer for a call recording company. I worked primarily with 911 agencies and would integrate recording systems with radio and phone systems to record the calls and radio traffic. If you've heard a 911 call on the news from one of the few states along the East Coast, there's a very good chance I built and installed that system. As part of our company's policy, we do preventative maintenance every 6 months. This was where we went on site, tested everything was functioning properly, and showed some value in our maintenance contracts through FaceTime with the customers. After some years, I'd climbed the ladder to being the lead engineer, installer, and trainer. I trained most of the other engineers and techs within the company along with performing my normal duties. I'd also installed the vast majority of the systems I was doing maintenance on and was extremely familiar with them. A maintenance visit took me around an hour, where it took the new guys 4 to 5 hours, and I would usually knock out 2 to 3 maintenance visits in a single day. I had literally triple the numbers as the next closest tech. As often happens, eventually the company was bought out. The new owner came in and presented himself as very metrics-focused. The problem was that he didn't understand what we did in the field, so his metrics weren't always good ones. Eventually, I got written up and put on a performance improvement plan. The reason? Days I didn't have to drive far, I'd finish 3 maintenance visits and still be home in less than 6 hours. Again, my actual performance metrics were legitimately triple the next closest tech, and most days I worked well over 8 hours when driving was included. But instead of looking at those metrics, he used time as his only metric and focused solely on the shortest days. And unfortunately for me, I objectively worked less time than anyone else. Instead of scheduling the way I had previously, I started scheduling to ensure I hit 8 hours a day, every day. Previously, I had started at a customer site at 9 a.m., whether it was 1 hour away or 5, so I'd get up at whatever time that day required. I would also try to knock out multiple customers in the same area on the same trip to save driving time on longer days. Some days I would drive 12 hours total, knock out 3 maintenance visits, taking another few hours, and have a total day of 15 plus hours. Afterwards, I left for sites at exactly 8 a.m. and tried to get home at exactly 5 p.m. For those sites that were 5 hours away, can't do them without a hotel room. Instead of costing a full tank of gas and a single day's wages for 3 clients, it now costs the company the same amount of gas, 3 to 4 nights in a hotel, and multiple days of my salary. For closer sites that I didn't need a hotel, I would make sure I didn't leave too soon to get home at exactly 5 p.m., so I would sit in a server room playing games on my phone for a few hours. If sites were close enough, I'd still try to knock out 2 or sometimes 3, but if time was the metric, I was going to make sure I worked as closely to 8 to 5 as possible without doing anything detrimental to a customer. Overall, I was trying to make a point to show that while I may have been meeting the time metric, I was actually doing less work by meeting that metric. We did employee reviews every quarter, and when my next review came around 3 months later, I tried to bring it up. Instead, the new owner praised me for working harder and ignored that I was doing significantly less work. During that meeting, I tried showing that it was costing the company more and I was achieving less by meeting that metric instead of my actual performance metric. But somehow, despite my spreadsheet showing costs, site visits, completed maintenance, and everything else, he refused to understand it. He kept praising how my work ethic had improved and didn't want me to change anything or go back. So I didn't change a thing and coasted at that job for the next few years. Not putting in enough hours, you say? Your shift from optimizing your work to gaming the system is a masterclass in malicious compliance. You gave them exactly what they wanted on paper, while quietly demonstrating how much efficiency they'd sacrificed in the process. It's both satisfying and maddening that they couldn't or wouldn't see the bigger picture. And our last story. My neighbor cut down my tree and ended up losing his house. Years ago, my family moved into a charming historic home on the edge of a conservation area in the countryside. The house was part of an old estate that had been divided into 3 separate cottages. Each cottage had unique, rare trees on its land, including a massive cedar and a pair of beautiful ancient English yews, adding substantial value to the properties. We lived next to an older couple who had been there for decades and were close friends with them. The couple maintained their section with care and even let us share their herb garden. Sadly, the husband passed away, and eventually his wife moved to be with family. Their son and his family moved in, and while we hoped for a good relationship, things went sour pretty quickly. The son, whom I'll call Dave, was not only careless but often rude. For example, he initially agreed to continue sharing the herb garden, but regularly left tools lying around or didn't properly water it. Then one day, his kids sneaked into our yard, took down our garden fence, and trampled over my mom's prized rose bushes. Things took an ugly turn when a storm hit and one of the large oaks on their property fell. They were clearly upset as it left their garden looking bare, and they made comments about how lucky we were to still have our beautiful trees. Dave's resentment grew, and he often complained about the excessive shade cast by our cedar, though in reality it was minimal. Then, while we were away on a short holiday, we returned to find an unsightly stump where our grand cedar had once stood. The 150-year-old tree, along with 2 nearby cherry trees, was completely gone. The only remnants were crushed branches and leaves strewn about, and 2 of the cherry trees had been damaged beyond repair during the removal. We were devastated, and it was especially painful for my parents, who'd loved that cedar. When we confronted Dave, he claimed there had been a storm and the tree was posing a hazard. He even had the nerve to hand us a bill for tree removal costs totaling nearly 5,000 pounds. We thought we were stuck. There was no proof it was his doing, and with our only security camera covering the front entrance, we had no footage of the back garden. But a couple of weeks later, my dad had a breakthrough. We had a small wildlife camera set up near the fence to monitor the foxes that sometimes came through. After combing through the footage, we caught it all. Dave and his friend, chainsaws in hand, taking down the cedar tree themselves. Armed with this evidence, we immediately consulted a lawyer. To assess the damage, we hired an arborist to explain that the cedar was likely over a century old and essentially irreplaceable. He also recommended bringing in a structural engineer as the tree's removal had left roots exposed close to the foundation of our cottage. We learned that the foundation now needed reinforcement due to the root disturbance, costing another 100,000 pounds. With evidence in hand, we took Dave to court for property destruction, trespassing, and damages. After hearing the case, the court ruled in our favor, ordering Dave to pay nearly 400,000 pounds, covering the tree's value, structural repairs, and damages to our cherry trees. Unable to cover the costs, Dave was forced to sell his cottage and move out. With the settlement money, we covered our mortgage, added a new kitchen extension, and even planted a few mature trees in the garden, including a young cedar to carry on the legacy. To honor the old cedar, we repurposed part of it into a beautiful dining table, keeping its memory alive. Dave learned the hard way that some roots run deeper than just property lines. Now, with a new cedar and a dining table crafted from the old, that tree's legacy stands taller than ever. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.